This video is sponsored by MPB. I recently bought this and this, and I assumed that I would be taking this everywhere with me because it's the fanciest camera on the market, right? But what's really surprised me is I've been taking this little dude out way more. So I like to think about the X70 as if a Ricoh GR camera and the Fujifilm X100 cameras had a baby, and you sort of end up with the best of both worlds, provided you don't mind not having a viewfinder. So the Fujifilm X70 has a 16 megapixel APS-C sized X-Trans 2 sensor, which means that you get access to the classic, lovely Fujifilm colours and the vast majority of the Fujifilm film emulations. That was really hard to say. You can create legitimate recipes on this camera, just like you can with the X100 for example. Though that has an X-Trans 3 sensor, which has a few more bells and whistles, but for all intents and purposes, the JPEGs you can get out of the X70 are sublime. And the X70 weighs just 340 tiny little grams, and it's properly pocketable. The lens at the front doesn't come out anymore when you turn the camera on, so you can legitimately use this as a pocketable camera. As you can see, it's way smaller than the X100 and it's more along the lines of the Ricoh-sized cameras. And while I do love the Ricoh cameras, I've taken the GR3X out numerous times with the 40mm equivalent focal length right up my street. Very good cameras, classic for a reason. I do think the build quality is a bit meh. It's very no frills. You don't have many dials to work with. You don't have that tactile experience. You don't have any flippy screens, for example. It really is quite bare bones, and that's by design in order to keep it so blooming small. But I think the X70 gets a large way there. It's very, very pocketable, but you still get all of the tactile goodness that you would see on larger Fujifilm cameras. You have a aperture ring, a focus ring, a shutter speed dial, exposure compensation, and even a little dial at the back. And you also have an articulating screen, which the Ricoh cameras could never. So you see what I mean? Like, best of both. You get your Fujifilm recipes and the Fujifilm sort of style and build quality, but it's kind of Ricoh-sized. It's very, very cool. So why isn't there like 10 versions of this camera? This camera's like 10 years old now. Why do we not have millions of them? Well, there's kind of a tragic backstory there. Now, because the Fujifilm X70 is discontinued and a little bit rare, the only place you're going to find the blooming thing is on the used market. And the best place to start looking is, of course, MPB. MPB are the world's largest platform for buying, selling and trading your used camera equipment. And that's where I bought my copy from, and I couldn't be happier. The whole thing is super simple. Another thing to bear in mind is you can also sell or trade with MPB as well. So if you're looking to switch up your camera gear, and used camera gear keeps its value, so you can actually experiment with a few cameras without losing much money. Top tip. All you need to do is go onto the website, type in your model number and list the condition, and then you'll instantly get a quote from MPB. If that is what you're after financially, just agree, and then the whole process is super seamless. And then at the end of it, you end up with cash in the bank, or you can use that money to trade in for something else that you fancy. So if you would like to check them out, I have links for UK, EU and US in the description, and using those links does really help this channel. So thank you as always to MPB, thank you to you, and let's get back to the nerdiness. There's literally not been a camera like this made by Fujifilm or anyone else before or since. And that's because this camera sort of flopped when it came out in February 2016. Don't ask me why. Maybe we just had terrible taste back then. Maybe we can only like cameras retrospectively. But at the time, the Ricoh cameras were sold out for days, and that absolutely stole the thunder of this line of cameras. To the point where in December 2016, less than a year later, the camera was unfortunately discontinued. Another factor of this, which really did put the nail in the coffin, is Sony makes the sensors, and they stopped making the X-Trans 2 sensors rather abruptly in favour of making the X-Trans 3 sensors, which you'd find in the X100, 5 and 6 and all the other ones. They didn't give Fujifilm any warning with this, so they couldn't stockpile them for future models, and why would they want a future model anyway, because it flopped. As time goes by, as is the way with camera enthusiasts, we look back and go, oh, you know what, we actually had something really cool. Recipes became very, very popular. The classic build quality and size became very popular. And suddenly the X70 has now become a classic, but we can't make any blooming more of them. The X-Trans 3 sensor, unfortunately, while it is very, very nice. Has thermal management problems when you put it in a camera body so small, which is why all the X100 series of cameras are much larger now. This really is the be-all and end-all of this style of camera with this sensor, unfortunately. And I think that's a real shame. The metal construction is something that you just you have to sort of feel to really appreciate. It does look really nice. And I've said a few times now, I think a lot of more modern cameras look the part, but don't necessarily feel the part in your hand. They may be designed to be looking cool on TikTok, but when you pick them up, it's all a veneer. When it comes to the Fujifilm X70, this feels like a hefty little boy. It feels really robust and dense, but not too heavy. It reminds me of do you know when you pick up an old film camera that's in really good condition and you're just like, how is this 50 years old? It feels like that. It feels indestructible. It's made of a mixture of magnesium alloy and aluminium, and it's very, very lovely and well built. And I think Fujifilm, quite like Olympus and OM System, have just hit the ground running with their timeless classic camera designs. You don't really know what era any of these cameras are made in. If you put the X106 brand new camera next to the X70, there's no way that you'd believe that there was an 8-year difference between them. If I told you that this was Fujifilm's brand new camera, you'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It looks just as fine, and it stands up today just as much as it always did. Now, there are a few glaring omissions, as is the case with a lot of Fujifilm cameras. Fujifilm X70 has a 28mm f2.8 fixed lens, and unfortunately, there's no IBIS in the camera or optical stabilization, but you could argue that while the lens is relatively wide, it's not the end of the world. But just note, there will be no sort of handheld long exposures happening with this camera anytime soon. I think it's something that Fujifilm have got away with for way too long, all the way up to the X105. It had no stabilization, optical or otherwise. One thing to bear in mind. Another thing to bear in mind is the autofocus is a little bit sluggish. It is actually a hybrid, contrast-based and phase detect sort of autofocus system, so it's not that it's dated, it's just that it's a bit sluggish. You can get away with it for most day-to-day use, but a lot of Fujifilm users really enjoy using the zone focusing method, where you'll shoot in manual focus, preset your distance away from the camera. So say if you were doing street photography, you'd want everything sort of 8 feet away from you in focus. Then you know that whenever you click the button, it's going to be in focus no matter what, and you don't have to rely on the camera. For me, I'm a little bit too sporadic to do zone focusing too often, so I've just been dealing with the autofocus. 9 times out of 10, it's fine. Sometimes it lets me down. So why do I keep reaching for the X70 over the X106? I've been on and off the fence of buying the X106 since I first reviewed it when it first came out. And it was the first camera for a while where I was like, oh, I kind of need this. It's special. It's a huge upgrade from the 5. So when I bought it, I assumed that I would just be completely in love with it and I would never put it down. But I've actually not used it very much. I think because I use a lot of cameras day to day, I am very, very good at taking a camera out of the box, changing basic settings and being able to go out and take photographs. It's literally my job, so I've got to be very proficient at that. But there's a world of difference between doing that and really knowing a camera inside out. And I find the X106 in particular to be very, very overwhelming in all of the customization and things that you can do with it. I mean, even if you look online, there's a beginner's guide that's an hour long. There's 7 hidden secrets that I need to know. There's 100 different recipes that I need to learn. There's ways to tweak and set it up properly. And I've actually just been procrastinating and putting it off because I know there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve to really get the most out of the camera. Whereas the X70, because it's 10 years old, it's a much more simpler sort of camera. You've got all of your dials ready to rock, turn it on, dial in a recipe or two if you wish, and go shoot. It doesn't seem to be that deep. And sometimes that's just the easiest way. So I will solemnly get to grips with my X106 before I do a really in-depth review. But in the meantime, I'm thoroughly enjoying the X70. And I think I'm a sucker for a tragic camera. I like unique, weird cameras that were doomed. And I think of all the doomed cameras that I've used or owned, this is actually the most tragic because I think the market has come around now and this is literally what everybody is screaming for. Something small, feature-rich, tactile, timeless looking, well-built, customizable JPEGs. It's great. And I just think it's a shame that we can't have that because the sensor technology isn't made anymore. I'm starting a new segment. This is my conclusion in as few words as possible. Little tank, pretty and functional, clicky, pocketable, They don't make them like they used to.